Good morning, everyone, or afternoon to those who are joining us on other coasts besides the West Coast. Welcome to FSMA Fridays. Looks like there's quite a crowd that's streaming on here. We're excited for today's session, and we'll just go ahead and dive in. Today we will be focusing a bit on Hasip to HARPC and the migration and approach and so forth. I do appreciate everyone attending today. My name is Jill Bender with Safety Chain Software. And before we begin, just a few quick housekeeping notes, as we always do. We always do send out the recording link. We will get that to you early next week to this session. We have quite a few questions that were submitted prior to this session, which we'll be going over, and then certainly welcome your questions. If you are logged into WebEx, that is how you can submit it. As always, for your privacy, you'll only see the panelists displayed, but as we've been getting closer and closer to FSMA, these sessions have become more and more well-attended. We've always had a good crowd, but quite a few people joining us today. I'm delighted to have with us today Dr. David Acheson. Good morning.
Good morning.
And also delighted to have back Peyman Fatemi with the tag team as well. Good morning.
Good morning, Jill.
So without further ado, let's go ahead and dive in. David, share with us what's happened this past month with FSMA.
Well, Jill, thank you, and good to be with everybody again. Well, the big news is we got a guidance document, and the bad news is it was one that was focused on how qualified facilities need to enter the information to be qualified, which, if everybody hopefully remembers, qualified facilities for the PC rule are the very small ones. So we got a guidance document out, but it really didn't help any of us who were trying to figure out how to write food safety plans. So maybe this is the opening of the floodgates, and we'll get lots of more guidance documents out in the near future. We'll keep our fingers crossed on that. But that's about it in terms of latest FSMA updates that I'm aware of, Jill.
Okay, great. So a guidance document without much guidance is what it sounds like.
well, yeah, guidance document that doesn't help most of us. It'll help very small businesses, but I would suspect that pretty much everybody on this call is not a very small business. But if there are any very small business folks on the call, then you have a guidance document which will help you figure out how to submit the information.
And humor me, David, how big was that guidance document? Do you recall?
Yeah, it was about, I want to say 30 pages maybe about.
Oh, okay, great. Well, thank you. Let's go ahead and dive in. We are going to focus today's topic on Hasip to HARPC. As you all may recall, we had a survey that we had done earlier in the year regarding FSMA readiness, and the overarching theme was there was still some clarification that needed regards to Hasip and migrating to HARPC and so forth. So that is today's topic. So let's go ahead and get started. Our first question here, and David, I'll ask you to address, why did the FDA go with HARPC versus just mandating Hasip?
Yeah, you know, I think that's in many ways is the fundamental issue that everybody's questioning is this Hasip? Is it more than Hasip? And we've talked about this in the past on FSMA Fridays, Jill, in terms of Hasip, HARPC, and what it all means. And I think FDA made it very clear in the very first round of the rule that this was not Hasip. It was more than Hasip. And as we go through the discussion this morning, I'm hoping that we can re-emphasize what HARPC is all about. But the agency could have mandated Hasip. And as everybody who's in the food space knows, Hasip is prescriptive. We've got the 7 steps. We've got the identification of critical control points. You know, it's very scientific. It's very defined. It's very sort of, it's got a start. It's got a stop. It's got defined limits. It's got actions. And there's many important food safety control systems that we have in place today that really don't lend themselves to the fundamental requirements of Hasip. And anecdotally, I remember way back when I was at FDA having conversations with certain people who were saying, well, why don't we require HACCP on farms for growing produce? And it took about 2 seconds before everybody realized, well, you couldn't do it. That growing system just doesn't work. It doesn't fit with the principles of HACCP, so we've got to come up with something else. So I think the point here is that while HACCP is extremely helpful and it's done us a great service over the years, this is an evolution of thinking. At least that's how I see it. And it's a recognition from the regulators that in today's environment, controlling food safety risks in a manufacturing, processing, packing, or holding environment is more than just about HACCP and about critical control points. They're all good, they're all solid, they're all necessary still, but it really has gone beyond that. Whether it's environmental sanitation, control programs in ready-to-eat areas, whether it's allergen control programs, whatever it is, we've recognized that there are some really important areas that require risk-based preventive controls, and that's what this is about. It's not just critical control points, it's risk-based preventive controls, which fundamentally the message here is think risk-based, and think the preventive controls that you need to control the risks you've identified that are important, that require controls. So it is an evolution of thinking. I think it's an advancement. I think it's trying to sort of move us forward in food safety thinking, Jill, and has taken us beyond HACCP. HACCP's has served us well, and I think the thinking has just evolved. So hopefully folks on the call are tracking with what I'm saying here, but it gets to the fundamental point that it's risk-based, it's preventive controls, and it's more than just straight HACCP. And it takes us further, which is why I think the FDA didn't simply mandate HACCP. They wanted us to go beyond that. So back to you, Jill.
Okay, great, thanks. We hear often it's, more a comprehensive approach, so that does make sense. Well, let's go ahead and keep the dialogue moving forward. Peyman, I'm going to ask you to jump in here and share a bit about the key areas of focus for HARPC for approach.
Thanks, Jill, and good to be with everybody again. What a great build-up on what David just mentioned is that the focus of the HARPC is, as David mentioned, is risk-based and preventing that risk, identifying that risk, and then preventing it from becoming a problem within the entire supply chain. So it's looking beyond just a specific process control within the facility, but as where is risk being introduced within the entire supply chain? Is it through the suppliers? Is it within your own confines of your own facility, or is it once it leaves your facility? And what are those risks? Who is controlling it, and how are we doing it? And so the prevention is the key here. And the facilities that are covered by the HARPC rule are required to put together a food safety plan and focus on identifying those hazards that require preventative controls. And those could be biological, chemical, physical, and now radiological. And then implement preventative controls if those risk analysis and hazard analysis identifies the risks that require preventative control. That preventative control needs to be validated, and then verify that it's effective, routinely monitored, and if it's going off the rail, corrective actions need to be taken. And ultimately, record keeping is a major focus of the company. So hazard identification, implementation of preventative controls, and record keeping, to me, are the major focus, and we're going to go deeper in this as we continue our discussions.
Okay, great, thank you. Well, and I think a nice follow-up question there, and David, I'll come back to you on this one if I can get the slide to move. There we go. So let's go ahead and just take the next step. What is some good ways from approaching moving to HARPC?
Yeah, thanks, Jill. Building off what we've talked about so far, and sort of going back to this fundamental principle that we've, again, espoused many times on FSMA Fridays around don't let all the good work that we've been doing over the last 10, 20 years go to waste. Food companies typically have got HACCP plans, and they've got prerequisite programs, and they've got other good manufacturing practice systems in place to protect the safety of the food, and obviously the quality to some extent in relation to the same systems. So my view of a good way to approach HARPC is really sort of looking at two key points. And as Peyman said, the FDA is going to want us to build a food safety plan. And we've talked many times also about what are the key components of a food safety plan, which is, number one, do a hazard analysis, and based on that, figure out which hazards require a preventive control. So the mission here, the approach here, is do your hazard analysis, but looking holistically across the whole system, literally to the point where you receive food, to the point where you ship it out. Where are hazards in my environment, in my system, in my facility? Where are the hazards that require a preventive control? And that will generate a list, basically. It's as simple as that. Some of the items on that list will be in your HACCP plan, no question. They'll be your critical control points. We use those. They go right into your food safety plan. Some of the other risks that you've identified may well be being controlled by some of your prerequisite programs. And the obvious one that we've talked about before, it's an obvious example, say it again, is environmental control programs. It's sanitation and cleaning and environmental monitoring to make sure it's all working. Won't be part of your HACCP plan, almost certainly, but they will be part of your prerequisite programs if you've got exposed, ready-to-eat foods. FDA sees that as a risk that requires a preventive control. So again, it's not recreating new systems. It's taking what you've got and incorporating it into your food safety plan. There may be other aspects in your GMPs or your prerequisite programs around allergen controls. If you are a facility where you've got allergens and you have to control that risk. So again, that's not going to apply to everybody. Environmental monitoring isn't going to apply to everybody either. But that's the key point, is look at your hazards, decide which ones elevate to those that require preventive control, and then leverage the programs that you've got, your current HACCP plan, CCPs, your current prerequisite programs, other systems that you've got in place, other SOPs, to build those into your food safety plan, and thus basically to be responsive to the requirement for a HARPC approach. One little sort of point here, which I think is worth mentioning again, is I don't think FDA is expecting us to rewrite all this stuff. If you've got programs built already, you just refer to them. If you've got a really solid environmental control program built, an environmental monitoring program built, just refer to it. See Section 5, Appendix 3 in your system, and that's that program. You don't have to sort of completely rejigger it. You have to make sure that these programs are compliant with the FSMA rule requirements, which in certain areas are pretty specific, especially around environmental monitoring. But that's just a sort of checkbox that you need to do. So in summary, Jill, I think the best way to approach this is, number one, figure out where your hazards are that require preventive controls, and then number two, look at the programs that you've got that already address those issues and link them together to make an overall food safety plan and thus a comprehensive HARPC approach. That's my thinking on that one, Jill.
Okay, great. Certainly not having to recreate everything from the onset, and defining the gaps and augmenting, I would think would be much more palatable. Moving forward, let's go ahead and address environmental controls. I know, David, you did touch on that. How does environmental controls and the monitoring program fit into HARPC? Peyman, why don't you address that, please?
Great. Jill, this is a topic that we've talked about quite a few times in the past, and I'm sure we're going to continue to talk about this moving forward, as has a significant impact on the companies. As David mentioned, if the program exists, then a lot of that components are already there and can fit nicely to the extent that they meet the FSMA requirements. But when we're talking about environmental controls, we're really asking, what are the factors that needs to be considered that impact the ingress or contamination of the production environment, processing environment, and how are we going to control it and ultimately get rid of the organism? So some of the factors that we need to take into account in these are the type of food, where it's coming from, what are the risks associated with it, and how are we going to handle it. If the supplier is controlling the risk through some level of intervention step, then how well is that system validated before it comes in to our facility, and how are we going to verify it through audits, through testing, and handling it subsequently moving forward. The type of equipment we're going to use, those have an impact, how cleanable they are, how well they're designed to be clean. The facility infrastructure makes a significant impact. These are all control programs that are already either in place or need to be enhanced to meet these, and understanding and training of employees as well. In terms of, this can include foot traffic, a lot of times controlling employee flow, equipment flow, and process flow, may be a challenge for some of the companies, as the process tends to kind of loop back on itself. And so keeping that in mind, if the product is going from a raw state to a process state and maybe receiving an intervention or a kill step or a heat process, then you want to make sure that you don't recontaminate it afterwards. So vehicle traffic, foot traffic, air movement, airflow, drains, environment, facility designs, all are component of the environmental control program that most facilities already have. And if it needs to be augmented and improved on, and this is the opportunity to do so. Environmental monitoring program is a way to verify, and that also includes the sanitation. That's all your programs, environmental control programs, are working. Specifically, FSMA requires facilities that produce ready-to-eat products, and that product is either exposed into the facility's environment prior to packaging and does not receive a subsequent treatment in the package, or formulated in a way that's going to get rid of the organism or contaminant that potentially could be there. They need to implement an environmental monitoring program. They do leave it, when you dig a little bit deeper into it, they do allow the facilities to make that distinction. If it's a raw agricultural product that's going to be subsequently processed, let's say potatoes, then environmental monitoring program may not be as applicable. But a product that's ready to eat and has seen a heat treatment, then the environmental monitoring program needs to be implemented. And that plays into hygienic zoning of the facilities, identifying where are the high hygiene zones and where are the areas that are upstream to that, and preventing recontamination from that area into the high hygiene areas. So these are all considerations that need to be taken into account when putting together an environmental monitoring program. Obviously, the organism, whether it's Salmonella, Listeria, other organisms, but those two tend to be the most common ones that facilities go after, depending on the type of process they have. And ultimately, how you manage that information and use it to make improvement into the process, take corrective actions, and control the safety of the product. And so that's where environmental monitoring and controls fit in to the HARPC plan. You're ultimately trying to reduce risk within the process through multiple programs and with their own set of SOPs, and verifying it through an environmental monitoring program that those plans are working.
All right. Great. And I'm assuming, from application standpoint, I know you talked a lot about from a processing or manufacturing, but this is certainly would be applicable to all participants in the supply chain, depending on the risk, correct?
Yes, it is. It is. The supplier of a specific component of a food or ingredient, obviously, they have their process and their program that needs to be in place. And that needs to be harmonized with the receiving facility, their customers, and end user of it as well. So absolutely, it does apply to the entire supply chain.
Okay, great. We get that question often. Thank you. Let's go ahead and move on then to a little bit of a different topic here, but certainly on everyone's mind in regards to compliance and when it's coming due. So, David, why don't you share with us, what is FDA expecting by September 1st?
Oh, yes, isn't that the million-dollar question, or the billion-dollar question, perhaps? As we were talking, Jill, in terms of FSMA updates, we don't have compliance documents. We're like, I wouldn't say we're in the dark, but we don't exactly have bright light illuminating the path forward here in terms of what FDA is expecting. Let me caveat my thoughts on this one with a little bit of just instinctive response as opposed to factual. And I think that everything I have heard from FDA, officially, unofficially, online, offline, is they recognize that there's a lot of people figuring out how to move forward with FSMA compliance. I think that they recognize there's a lot of companies that are not there yet. They recognize that there's a lot of work still to do. I believe that, and maybe this is wishful thinking on my part, and it's more I hope than I believe, but I do fundamentally believe that they are going to anticipate facilities will not necessarily have a fully buttoned up food safety plan by September 17th. And the key point here is then what is the expectation? What do they expect us to have in place by then? And I think that they are going to want a pretty solid effort in terms of moving forward with building the plan. So in other words, I think they will have expected us to have the rudiments of our food safety plan. They will have expected us to have figured out what the hazards are. We may not have got everything stitched up, completely put together nicely. They may not anticipate that every preventive control will be validated and we'll have all the documentation, but we're quote working on it. Here's what we're doing to fill the gaps and fill the holes. So while the law is basically, the regulation is stating by September 17th, 2016, if you are a facility or an entity, I should say, not a facility, an entity with more than 500 employees, you will be compliant. I don't anticipate a flurry of inspections that are going to be dishing out 483s if there's minor deficiencies or there's struggles with building a food safety plan. And I say that because I really think that FDA is also trying to figure this out as much as we are. They're obviously leveraging the states to go and do these inspections also. There is a massive education campaign going on with inspectors and with state inspectors so that there's better understanding of what the requirements are and what the expectations will be. So I think that if by September 17th you are able to show the FDA a work in progress, so to speak, that you've got something that's reasonably robust, even if it's not totally complete yet, I think that will be good. Per the topic of this particular FSMA Friday, Jill, I feel very strongly that the FDA is going to want facilities to understand HARPC. So if you are able to say, here's what we're doing to meet the HARPC requirements, here's what we're doing to build our food safety plan, we've got 50% of it built, 75%, 90%, Obviously, 100% is the goal, but recognizing that we may not be there in some key areas where we're building up this part of the program, we're figuring out that part of the program. There's also a little wiggle room, as everybody remembers, with supply chain control. We do have an extra 6 months on that one. So subpart G, which is clearly causing a lot of churn and concern in the industry because of who has to do what, and the letters of assurance, and there's all sorts of stuff flying around on that. And we do have a longer time to meet compliance on the supply chain control part. So I think that's kind of where I'm at, and I don't believe it's entirely wishful thinking, Jill. I think it truly is understand the principles, be able to talk about how you're building your food safety plan. Hopefully, if you don't have somebody trained yet, you will have, and you're on a trajectory to get that done. And you're able to speak clearly and articulately about what it is you're doing and where you are in the process. And I think they'll give us some slack. Another way of looking at this, Jill, is to say I think that the first visits maybe are you getting the principles? Are you working towards the principles? Are you working towards the end goal? Tell us how you're doing that. Then I think we'll see another round, maybe 6, 9, 12 months from now, where the agency will be coming in and asking for some real specifics. They'll be coming in and saying, show me your monitoring program, show me your environmental control program, show me your corrective actions, as a means to test the system that companies have really got this figured out, or show me your supplier approval program. So I think we'll evolve on this, and I think there's going to be more learnings and more things to talk about through FSMA Fridays and other forums for a good bit to come on this. Lots of learnings, and as soon as we start to get FDA inspections, I hope people will share them with us so we can all learn from what they're actually doing at the operational level. So that's my thought on what they're expecting, Jill.
Okay, great. Thank you. And I was just making a few notes. I think there's definitely some folder for good conversations moving forward on FSMA Fridays. 2 questions that came in real quickly, and just the same question really is your comment about dishing out 483s. Those are written letters from the FDA, right, as far as noting deficiencies?
Yeah, they are. They're documents that the FDA leaves behind when they've finished an inspection that lays out a series of observations that they've determined you need to address whether you've got deficiencies in meeting the requirements of the Code of Federal Regulations. They're not something that you really want to have the FDA leave behind.
Right.
And we all know that. They're not a good thing, and they do need to be responded to. So, yeah, that's what a 483 is, Jill, yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you for that clarification. So let's go ahead and finish up our last pre-submitted question that came in. And Peyman, I'm going to bring this back to you. And the acronym PCQI, it seems to be out in the press and news and everything. But let's go ahead and just talk a little bit about the role of the preventive control qualified individual relative to HARPC.
Thank you, Jill. Yeah, the preventative control qualified individual, lovingly referred to as PCQI. It's essentially what David referred to. The person is going to actually quarterback this whole writing of the food safety plan, validation of the preventative controls, records review to make sure they're effective, that they're being implemented, and following up on corrective actions and reanalysis of that food safety plan down the road as either the process changes or the product changes, reformulated, or just making sure that, we're changing it to make it more robust. So those are some of the roles of the PCQI person. They are defined in the regs as a qualified individual who successfully completed training, development, and application of risk-based preventive controls that is at least equivalent to the standard curriculum that recognized by the FDA. They also say, or is otherwise qualified through job experience or education to develop a food safety system. My take is, have your facility, identify that person and have them go through the FDA training that's being given right now. I think that's a great standard curriculum and helps you just essentially circumvent the question, is my person qualified as a PCQI or not? So, and that person can be an external consultant as well if they don't have a identified person internally. Or it could be more than one person if you have a more complex process, maybe a very large operation that simply just one individual is not going to be able to handle. So there's a couple of ways to handle it, but that's what the role of the PCQI is. You can have, it has to be facility specific, but that person can manage multiple facilities and take the FDA training to make sure that, you know, there is no questions remaining in terms of are they qualified or are they not.
Great, thank you. And I'm sure, and many of you have seen, it seems like an abundance of trainings are coming out to fulfill this need, specifically out there. I certainly get
Absolutely.
notices about those all the time. And that's interesting too about the consultant angle. You know, if you're working regularly with a consultant or they were part of your gap analysis, is that what that's in reference to?
Yeah, could be an external, consultant generally is what we refer to.
Okay, great. No, that is interesting. There's always something new. I certainly learn on these sessions. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and take us out of full screen. I recognize we're at the bottom of the hour here. We try to stay within our tight time frame for our FSMA Fridays. We tend to go over just a little bit here and there. There are some questions that have come in, and I don't know, I should have asked prior, David and Peyman, are you okay to hang out just for a few more minutes to answer a few more questions?
Yep. No, I'm good for a few minutes.
Okay.
Sure.
Nothing like putting you on the spot there. So I have taken us out of full screen. If you want to go ahead and enter your question in the Q&A box, and I see a few coming in. And as those are coming in, of course, I would be remiss not to do a special call out to the Acheson Group. They certainly, we talk at a very broad level and specific insights on these sessions, but for a more narrowly defined scope of your gaps and just getting you in general FSMA ready, TAG Group is absolutely a great group of consultants that could help you in that process. So highly encourage you to utilize the TAG Group. And of course, I will most definitely call out Safety Chain Software. Our comprehensive system really does provide more of a holistic approach to your food safety and quality operations and helping you ensure FSMA compliance. Once you've defined your plans and gaps, incorporate them, having a more holistic, harmonized approach in managing your programs across your operations is what Safety Chain does. So anyone that needs additional information, certainly it is there for you. So with that, let me go ahead and throw out some of these questions, and then whatever we don't get to, we always sort of line up for the next one. So let me pull up just a few, see if you all seen that as well. There was a question in regards to smaller companies, as far as the timeline for companies under that 500 mark. Is there any guidance related to that? And,
I'm sorry, Jill, what's the question there?
They were asking for, as far as timeline for companies to be compliant if you're under the 500 mark.
Oh, yeah. That is, we have another 12 months for that. So it's if you're less than 500 employees, full-time equivalents, you have until September 2017 to be compliant. If you're more than 500, this is for the preventive control rules. Let's be clear. That's what we're talking about. Mm-hmm. If you are more than 500, then you've got to be compliant by September of this year. So it's just down the road. One point of clarification there, because people get confused, is that like 500 per facility, or is it, what is it? And our read of this is that it's 500 in the whole organization. The whole enterprise. So it's not just in a facility. So in other words, if you are a manufacturing company with 3 plants and you've got 200 people in each one of them, then collectively as an organization you've got 600 individuals, full-time equivalents working for you. That makes you more than 500 across the whole organization, the whole enterprise. That kicks you into being a a non-small business. So keep that in mind. It's not just per facility, it's across the whole enterprise.
Okay, great. And there was a question just regards to the guidance document that we mentioned earlier, where to find that. I'm assuming on the FDA site, or any more thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's on the FDA site. I don't have the URL right off the top of my head, but it's definitely there. But remember, this guidance document is just for very small businesses. It's for qualified, as the FDA calls it. What does it take to be a qualified business, which is the very small businesses, and it gives no information on writing food safety plans, because those qualified facilities don't have to do that. But it is on the FDA website. It should be on the FSMA site.
Okay, great. Looking at a couple more questions, there is one about GFSI relative to FSMA. I know we get that quite often as far as the tie-in. I know certainly, Dave, your organization has been involved with some of the larger schemes in identifying, how they're similar and where the gaps are, correct?
Yes, we have, yeah. So is there a question there?
Yep, nope, that was basically, say what is, the tie-in or the difference between the two. And I think that the overarching there is, that there definitely is some gaps, but some line up nicely, right?
Okay, right. No, there is, the gaps are pretty small. I think there's some nuances. I think, GFSI really requires the same sort of strategic risk-based thinking and good control programs in place across the whole deal. It's just not, in our opinion, adequate to simply say, when you're asked, show me your food safety plan, to say, well, I haven't actually built one, but I'm GFSI certified, and therefore, as far as I'm concerned, I'm compliant. That's not going to fly very well with an FDA inspector. So just back to what I was saying earlier, and Peyman was adding to, in terms of leverage what you've got. And if you're GFSI compliant and you're GFSI certified, you've basically got all the nuts and bolts you need to put this together. You just have to kind of just literally put it together using, leveraging all that good stuff that you've got for GFSI.
Okay, great. Thank you. And, and I'm just going to go ahead and just one more question here, because I recognize people do need to get on with their day today. It goes back to the employee size, Dave, that you were talking about. This particular question, is the whole enterprise organization defined as in the U.S. or globally? I always like to stump you on one of these, don't I?
I think if it's, my instincts there would be to say globally. If it's truly under the same corporate structure, I think I would take it as global. I think that would be my default. But I don't remember that. I don't remember seeing that exact question be discussed by FDA. But they haven't differentiated an enterprise if it's split between countries. They have discussed enterprises that are split in different ways. So, and they sort of saying, no, you need to roll it all up together. So I haven't seen a specific exemption to say, if you've got 400 employees in the United States and 5,000 in other parts of the world, then it makes you a small business. I don't think they'd see it that way at all. I think, and so that would be, make that assumption. Would be my advice, is just assume that if you look globally, look at the size of the organization globally. That's what I'd do.
So take the more preventive approach to what's expected.
Yeah, right.
Great.
Maybe I'm being a little conservative, and you could argue, well, you haven't really made it clear, and what I'm worried about is that they will point to some line on page 556 in the middle of the preventive control rule that says, oh, yeah, here it is. And, of course, Acheson missed that and giving out the wrong information. So until somebody comes up and points that out specifically to all of us on FSMA Friday, then that would be my default.
And we would never say you gave the wrong information. I can't
well,
tell you how much. You're making broad assumptions in a format that's very informative, and it's interesting. We're just at the Food Safety Summit last week. I know a lot of folks here online with us too, and I had so many people come in and just really compliment what they've gathered out of these sessions. So special call out again, David, to both you, your team, Peyman, and so forth on that. So I didn't mean to cut you off. Are you going to respond one more thing on that?
No, I'm going to keep quiet before I get myself in trouble.
That's great. Well, on that note, I am going to wrap up today's session. There were some questions we didn't get to. We always try to transfer them on to the next session. Next month in June, we will, assuming, right, the final rule for food defense comes out here fairly quickly here, I believe, the end of the month. I believe it's due.
It is due. Yes, I should have made that as a FSMA update. I've not heard that it's behind slow, so yeah, it's due May 31st.
Okay, so I anticipate then that'll give you a full 24 days to decipher that and share with us in June the high-level components of that. So again, thank you for everyone that's joined us today. As mentioned, the Acheson Group, achesongroup.com, lots of information, trainings, and information that you can contact them directly for consultations, and certainly business at Safety Chain. And I think that is it for, thank goodness it's FSMA Fridays. Thank you, everyone. And again, special call out and thank you again to both David and Peyman.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Jill.
Mm-hmm.